So my name is Tobias, and I grew up in Sweden, where animals really mark a centerpiece of our culture. This is my house here. Especially when it comes to food, whether they come in the form of our traditional meatballs, salmon from our Norwegian neighbors to the west, brisket with lingonberry jam, or any of our butter and cream-filled pastries. My grandfather also owned a tiny dairy farm, where as a child I used to spend many weekends intrigued by the cows and their calves. At the demise of my grandfather, he soon had to sell off all of his animals to larger farms, as it was no longer profitable for him to keep such a tiny operation going, as the industry was growing out of a growing demand for dairy products. Because of how normalized the consumption of animal products was in my early life, and because my grandfather's animals had been treated so well overall, I never questioned growing up whether it could be morally problematic to rear animals for food. In fact, I went a little bit further than this, and I had good laughs at the expense of the vegans that I saw videos of, protesting outside of steakhouses and farms. I found it ridiculous that anyone should impose their vegan views upon anyone else, and I furthermore thought that eating meat was the only way to live a good and healthy life. I'd worked out a lot when I grew up, and I thought that in order to keep my fitness goals progressing, I had to consume about a pound of animal meat a day. And steak also happened to be my absolute favorite food. And it wasn't really until my first philosophy class in college, when I was forced to reevaluate my views. We watched the eye-opening documentary Earthlings that showed footage revealing the practices of factory farming, commercial fishing, leather manufacturing, etc. After seeing this film, I was faced with a dilemma. That is, if I place intrinsic value in human suffering and deem it right to mitigate this suffering to the greatest extent possible, why should I not extend this principle to non-human animals as well, given that they likely suffer and feel pain in similar ways as ourselves? It was easy for a while to justify my consumption, even knowing what it was connected with, by using the excuse that everyone else did it, so it couldn't be that bad. But then I thought, culture or society at large should not dictate morality, because if it did, it's hard to see how cases such as colonialism, imperialism, various forms of slavery, oppression of minorities and women couldn't be justified so long as they were practiced and accepted widely within any given culture. This has, of course, often been the case historically, and it still remains in certain aspects today. Having thus removed this excuse that because everyone else does it, I'm justified in doing it, I turned vegetarian 3 years ago. I then cut out dairy completely, and 2 years later, I had completely cut out eggs and non-diet related products, such as leather. I hope that my story can at least spark some hope in you if you right now question whether you could ever take the leap to a vegan lifestyle seriously. I didn't think I could 10 years ago. Probably would have laughed at you if you asked me that question. But since then, my views changed, my habits followed. And as you can tell, it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a very gradual process. But now, I barely think about these products anymore that I used to crave on a daily basis. I think that most people are against animal cruelty in principle. I derive this hunch from the fact that every year, protesters show up in cities all over the United States to voice their dissent towards the Yulin Dog Festival in China, where dogs are butchered and eaten. Many of us are also disturbed by the gigantic loss of species habitat resulting from the destruction of different ecosystems, such as coral reefs and rainforests. We object to Japan, Iceland, and Norway practicing commercial whale hunting. We're furious at the ivory trade, the exotic meats trade, and trophy hunting that takes place in many places in Africa and Asia. We're also against elephant tourism safaris in South Asia, bullfighting in Spain. There was a recent controversy about a bungee jumping pig in China. We're repulsed at SeaWorld's treatment of their animals, and we don't like zoos that don't act for conservatory but purely commercial purposes. This list can go on and on. But when it comes to our consumption of animal products, most of us do not seem to apply these same principles. And I think that's either because we're not informed of what these products are connected with, or because we turn a blind eye to it because it's been so normalized within our lives. But by far, Most animal cruelty currently takes place within factory farms. This is where 99.6% of all animals in the US are killed. This is about where we kill 9 billion animals annually, out of which 100 million suffer to death before even making it to slaughter. In these facilities, we gas pigs to death using carbon dioxide gas, which is oddly enough considered the most humane way to kill them. We forcefully impregnate cows and take their calves away from them upon birth so that we can get our milk. In the egg industry, all of the male chicks are thrown into a macerator where they're ground up alive upon birth because they don't provide any value to us because they don't lay eggs like their female counterparts. We also debeak chickens, and we cut the tails and teeth off of pigs so that they don't hurt each other in the extremely crowded conditions that we keep them in. Many of these animals sleep in their own feces. Many of these animals break their legs because we bred them so heavy that their bones cannot support their weight. Many of these animals never see sunlight except in the transportation from their breeding pens to the slaughterhouse. According to the Sentience Institute, pooling data from the USDA and EPA, this is where 99% of our farmed animal products come from. You might ask the question about fish too, and commercial fishing is not really a better industry at all. 47 billion fish are estimated to be fished out of the ocean by the US alone, a process which is not only extremely devastating for the oceans themselves, but it also induces an immense amount of suffering to these creatures, who will usually just suffocate to death on our boats. I've used the collective pronoun we in the description of these horrible practices, because I don't think that we can be said to be wholly inseparable from them. By buying these products, we in effect directly perpetuate the demand for them. The strange and contradictory reality here is that when animals are turned into products, objectified as mere commodity for us to consume, they seem to lose those qualities that we value so highly in these other species of animals. They're not bred and butchered for food within our particular culture. Even if in principle these animals don't lose these qualities, we surely treat them as if they have. It's important that I also point out at this point that it's not necessary to consume animal products to live a good and healthy life. The American Dietetics Association, as well as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which happens to be the largest organization of nutrition experts in the world, you see their statement here, both state that a vegan lifestyle is healthy for all stages of life, including infancy and pregnancy. There are also really good reasons beyond animal welfare for going vegan. It's been estimated that animal agriculture is the largest culprit of rainforest deforestation, and is currently the industry which contributes the most to climate change when all dimensions of analysis are taken into account. Livestock occupies 25% of the Earth's land surface, which amounts to 80% of all agricultural land. It takes 9 calories worth of chicken or worth of plant feed to produce 1 calorie worth of chicken. And chicken is our most efficient animal industry. Back in '97, the Cornell Chronicle assessed that if people were given the grain that was currently being used to feed livestock, it could be used to feed 800 million people. The organization Faunalytics has also estimated that if we completely switched over to plant-based agricultural system, we could grow about 5 times as much food using only 69% of the land that we currently use. Another major concern with factory farms is that they're really the ideal breeding grounds for antibiotic-resistant superbugs. Viruses here have the ability to develop and mutate resistance to all the antibiotics that we're giving our animals, which could make them extremely difficult to rid ourselves of if we should have an outbreak. If we are aware of all of these implications of animal agriculture, and I'm not saying that we are, I wasn't for the vast majority of my life. After all, for every claim in favor of veganism, there are at least 10 advertisements tempting us with animal products. But if we are aware, we have to ask ourselves, do we have any justification to keep consuming these products? When I contemplated my own consumption practices a few years ago, the answer to why I kept my consumption going despite knowing what it was connected with ultimately boiled down to something like taste or convenience. But even though I grant that human beings have higher moral value than non-human animals, surely our own taste buds can't be said to be valued higher than their lives and well-being. I don't think it's consistent for us to point our fingers at other cultures or certain aspects of our own culture that we don't happen to partake in or agree with and claim that this alone is where animal cruelty is wrong. Because here, we say, it's done for arbitrary reasons. Because really, at the end of the day, I think that our justification for consuming animal products is just as arbitrary as theirs is for treating animals poorly. Namely, that it boils down in one way or another to some form of pleasure, whether it concerns taste, convenience, the comforts of tradition, entertainment, or simply the thrill of the hunt. Moral progress is generally slow. Bit by bit, a society wakes up to some wrong that's been committed across time. Some, perhaps most even, wait and let laws and the social attitude at large dictate their moral change. But it must begin somewhere. If what I've said to you here today resonates with you on some wavelength, try to remember that it's very easy to just ignore this hunch, especially when our social practices are not only incongruent with it, but even actively help us suppress it. I think it's vitally important, though, that we think of our own situation similar to how we think of people's situation in the past. While we might be morally superior to them on many accounts, what we likely share with them is a generic attitude that there are certain things that we're doing right now that are not wrong because they align with our social conventions and norms. As I've already articulated, I think that we need to go beyond these norms and consider the actual arguments and the implications surrounding these issues. If our ancestors didn't do this, I think it's likely we would still be forced to believe in God. Slavery might even still be legal. Women might have no right to vote. We might even still be having public executions. Through our commodification of animals, we've given rise to an industry that is extremely devastating for the environment, wasteful of resources, and a breeding ground for antibiotic-resistant superbugs that could essentially reverse many of the advances of modern medicine. At the core of these industries, we selectively breed animals into existence inside of concrete chambers, where we pump them full of antibiotics and hormones in conditions where they suffer most of their lives until slaughter, when some of them are lucky enough to be fully unconscious when we slit their throats. Is this really a practice that we're prepared to defend at this point? Or is it rather more in alignment with our own views and values to step away and support the abolition of it? I think that we have the opportunity here to step out of a very dark cave. If you choose to step out with me here, you will help the environment, make the world a slightly safer place, but I think most importantly, you will cease directly contributing to the conditions of these innocent animals who are born, who suffer, and who die inside of these factory farms on these concrete floors without the slightest clue as to why we are doing this to them. Thank you.